light topic to start off the night, and that's death and how to do it the most sustainable way. So I really like this quote: death is not the opposite of life, but it's a big part of it. And I think we often think life and death are at odds, but we do it. We all do it. So what is a life cycle analysis? It's a really holistic way of looking at a whole system or a product. It basically looks at the cradle, so we extract resources, all the way to the grave. So where does that product or material end up? An ideal system is circular, and I like to think of myself as a bit of a circular economist. So ideally with materials, you loop them around infinitely. So your plastic bottle is a good example of that. Unfortunately, with bodies, we can't keep using them unless we do some necrophilia or something really weird like a weekend at Bernie's. So why should we care about what happens to us after we die? Most people these days will try and live quite sustainably. They'll choose things that are lower in footprint, lower in carbon. They'll say no to consumption. However, as much as we can live sustainably, we all die, unless we're John Wick. Basically, we emit about 4.8 tonnes of CO2 a year just by consuming and living and doing our thing. But when we die, the choice we make with what happens to our body can range from 0.1 tonnes of CO2 to a huge 1 tonne of CO2. And just to put that in context, 1 tonne of CO2 is about 18 cows farting constantly for a whole year, or driving about 23,000 miles, but I like the cows. So what are we doing in Australia? So about a quarter of us choose burial, and that started from 2017, so rather recently. We all know what that is. We get put in a casket, get covered in formaldehyde, people come to a nice, pretty funeral, and then we get placed into the ground at a really prime spot of real estate, usually. Cremation, 71%, so we use high heat to reduce the body to ash. Pretty basic. If you burn it, it will reduce. And then what happens to that ash is sometimes people like to keep it on their mantelpiece or people scatter it. Donations, so I guess relevant to a recent topic covered in Nerd Night, donating one's body to science or organ donation. And you can do, I guess, both. You can donate some organs and get cremated. But 4% of us are currently signed up to be donated. And then less than 1% decide to go the cryogenics sci-fi way or resignation. Interestingly, it is linked very much with culture and religious beliefs. But across the board, burial is becoming less and less popular. In fact, in Japan, your body has to be cremated. It is illegal to be buried or go anywhere else. But yeah, it is a slow decline or quite a steep decline in some instances. You'll notice that places that have a lot of land constraints tend to decline more rapidly. So Hong Kong's a good example of that. There's just not enough land to bury all the bodies. So why the shift? Why are we moving away from burial? Because it's bloody expensive and we're all poor. But also, Australians at large are far less religious, according to the census. We're seeing death as less representative of how we lived and more of a way to just sort of dispose of our body. In religious countries, burial is still very much the norm. Ireland has a very high rate of burials. And as I said, Japan, less than 1%. So let's do a bit of a dig into what burial means. Throughout this talk, I'll be covering the main inputs. So what actually adds the most CO2 and the most impacts to each of these methods. So the coffin, it's a big one. You've got to grow trees, you've got to make the coffin, you've got to lacquer it up, make it pretty. It uses a lot of energy and a lot of land space. Formaldehyde, you don't want to start rotting, you don't want to stink at your own funerals, so we use a lot of formaldehyde, and that's quite a toxic chemical to embalm the body. It's very harmful to the environment, it's very harmful to human health. So people who work in embalming bodies actually suffer long-term health impacts from exposure. The actual funeral itself, so having a party, that actually causes a lot of waste. You've got food, you've got a venue, you've got people coming from far away, there's probably a lot of plane rides. And land use. Cemeteries take up a lot of land space that could otherwise be used for a lot better things, like growing food or parks. The other thing about the land use involved is the formaldehyde eventually seeps into the ground, making it basically worthless. Cremation. This one's quite popular. Who here wants to be cremated? Pretty decent. Cremation's interesting. It's been around for a very long time. It's gaining in popularity. Depending on what's inside of you, people have pacemakers, metal joints, breast implants. That all needs to be taken out. Sometimes they keep the breast implants in, but they cause a bit of an issue because they become essentially like a glue at the bottom of the furnace. So there's a lot of gutting involved in cremation. The other thing is what you're cremated in. So are you placed in a box? Are you wrapped in a shroud? That all needs to be created and then just burnt. So it's basically creating a whole material with the objective of incinerating it. And that's quite a lot. It takes about 2.5 hours for a body to be reduced to the nice ash that you might scatter across the ocean as well. So that's a lot of heat, a lot of energy, and a lot of time. In the UK, a lot of crematoriums aren't using filters, so that fume, that gas is just being emitted. A few years ago, it was detected that it was especially problematic because there was a lot of mercury being emitted from crematoriums. The mercury comes from people's fillings, so back when mercury was used in your fillings, people didn't really think about it, and when you're incinerated, a lot of mercury was being released. I think about 20% of mercury emissions to the atmosphere are based in a crematorium, so it's quite a lot. It's quite toxic. We don't really use mercury in our fillings, but as people kind of reach the end of life, there are still people with mercury fillings, so that's still a problem. Energy, a lot of natural gas goes into cremation. It's quite intense, a lot of pollutants. The urn itself, so you don't want to be put into a Kmart vase, so often a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, a lot of natural resources, a lot of clay, a lot of metals to make those fancy urns, so they're quite intense. And then the disposal. What do you do with the ash when you're done looking at it on your mantelpiece? Do you scatter it? Because that actually has an impact. That ash is not just carbon. That ash contains lots of things, lots of forever chemicals that you've digested, throughout your life by eating fish, getting mercury in you. So there's a lot. Dioxins. We end up with a lot of stuff in our waterways from people doing a romantic scattering. Cryogenics. This is a bit of a myth or a legend. Arnie was a big fan of it. So we estimate there's about 500 people that are currently frozen, most of them in the US. They're a bit crazy over there. They like to think they can live forever. In fact, there was a rumour that Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen, but that's been debunked, so there's no Disney on ice. We actually saw a huge increase of people cryogenically frozen during COVID. And it was an interesting kind of knee-jerk reaction, I guess, to people realizing that they can't live forever. So demand for cryogenics went up significantly, particularly in those nations that were hardest hit. So more and more people are being stored in refrigerators across the world. So freezing. Refrigerants take up a lot of energy. And in my analysis, when we get to it, I've assumed half of that is renewable, half of that is fossil fuel. You need an extremely low temperature to keep the body preserved for a long time. You need a lot of backup systems. You can't really thaw out a body and then refreeze it. It's kind of like rice. Liquid nitrogen. So to use as sort of the medium in which the bodies are submerged in, that requires a lot of energy and extraction. So nitrogen, the atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen. We extract that through an industrial process. The storage, so the metal tanks themselves, have a lot of embodied carbon and a lot of extractive resources. You don't really use recycled Coke cans for that. And then if it ever comes to it, the revival. So what do we do with a cryogenically frozen body? Can we Frankenstein them and can we make them live again? That requires a lot of medical equipment. Or do we just end up calling it a day and burning them after them being frozen for about 100 years? One of my favourites, Viking send-offs. Unfortunately illegal in Australia. You can be put into prison for 3 years just for doing one, so sorry. For those that don't know what a Viking send-off is or a Viking funeral, it's when you build a boat, you essentially get all your friends and family to shoot flaming arrows, you add a bit of fuel and you watch it burn. It's pretty cool. I was speaking to a couple of friends and like, I don't know what a Viking funeral is. Do you mean a Game of Thrones funeral? So that might be what it's called. So in a Viking funeral, you can still do these in Norway, and you can still do these in some states in the US, but you do need special approval. The boat, you've got to grow a forest, you've got to harvest the wood, you've got to build the boat, only to burn the boat. It's a bit intense. Causes deforestation and habitat destruction. The fuel, obviously, fuel's quite intensive, so you need something to start the fire and to carry the fire. The ash, similar to cremation, it releases a lot of ash, and whatever's in your body, it basically gets put into the environment, some of it good, some of it not that great. And the bow and arrow itself, that has inputs. So what does it look like when you add it all up? And I like to look at things in a few different lenses, and this is based on just one average body being disposed, so say about an 80 kilo normal human being. This is the CO2 emissions. So the Viking funeral has a lot, and it's to do with the boat. The boat's big, requires a lot of construction, and then a lot of burning, which releases a lot of CO2. Cryogenics, it's the electricity to keep you cool, very high. And burial and cremation, they're about even. The burial one is interesting because it also takes into account the construction of a headstone, the extraction of resources from a quarry. You've got to make, those nice headstones to kind of visit. Land use. So burial, big one. Take up a lot of good land, as does the growth of the casket wood source. Cremation, a little bit for the inputs into the actual crematorium. And Viking, again, that's mostly the forest. Human toxicity. So this refers to elements that are released when you're choosing different burial methods. For burial, it's the formaldehyde. That stuff's nasty. It stinks, it's fumes, it's very volatile as well. So you lose a lot of it in the process as well. A lot of it doesn't actually make its way onto the body. Cremation, Again, it's the mercury, but also all the other stuff that you've managed to ingest, the microplastics and everything else. Cryogenics, actually not too bad. It's pretty stable, it's pretty inert as a process. And Viking, yeah, a bit more. You've got more fumes from the actual burning, but not as much as cremation. Oop. So what can we do to be a bit more sustainable? We can choose something called a green funeral, green burial site. And I really like this example where there's just a park where people get buried. And if you want to visit your friends and family, because people, still need a way to grieve and find that closure, you can actually just wave a wand and find out where your friend is, and it will kind of beep as you get closer and closer, like a Geiger counter for your friend. I actually think that's really cool, because it kind of adds a, hide and seek element to it. They're looking at building one in Lilydale, actually, so, it could be on the horizon. You could kind of play hide and seek with your friends and family forever. But with this one, it's actually quite sustainable in that you don't have a headstone. You get buried in a shroud, which is like a natural cloth, so it just composts into the land. Ideally, before you're buried, you're, for lack of a better word, gutted, if you have pacemakers and those sorts of things. Maybe you get your teeth pulled out if you have mercury fillings, I don't know, so it doesn't leach, if you want to be super idealistic. But yeah, this is sort of where we're going, but slowly. It's obviously a very personal choice in how you wish to dispose of your body, and nothing's black and white, but sometimes it's good to think about the legacy that you'll leave when your body is, here forever. That's it.
Wow, I don't know about you guys, but I'm still disappointed I can't get a Viking funeral. Okay, so we'll take a few questions for Rachael here, if you just want to raise your hands. Yep. Yeah.
Could you go back to the slides and explain the use of y-axis?
Yes, so depending on what the actual actual metric you're looking at, it's for this one it's metre squared per year, so how much land does a burial take approximately? Yes, one body. And this one obviously is kilogram CO2 equivalent, so there's more emissions above just carbon that actually impact global warming, which is why there's an equivalent. This is basically dioxins equivalent as well, so kilograms. I do have a bigger table, if you want to nerd out, I can leave it up there, which shows the units, because I didn't present all the data, but with the LCA you do look at acidification, eutrophication, which is damage to waterways, global warming, toxicity. So you can look at it through a lot of different lenses, and it's kind of a challenging thing because it's never clean cut. There's never just one winner, and it really boils down to what do you care about? Do you care about carbon emissions? Do you care about toxicity? Because you can arrive at two different answers.
Great. Any other questions? Yep, right here.
Hi, that was really good. So if you're assuming you're not religious, there are no regulatory restrictions, and you're getting quite creative about it, what do you reckon is the most sustainable way?
Oh, I do think about this a lot, and it's a bit dark, to be honest. Like the blood and bone, or being fed to something is probably pretty metal, but pretty sustainable.
I actually had one. I'm going to be really selfish and ask it. What about sky burials?
It's such a good question, and I almost looked at this one. Look, sky burials, they're probably not a far cry away from just your natural burial. With a bit of, vulture activity and stuff like that. They're just not very controlled. So I would say they're up there in sustainability.
All right. Sorry, a sky burial is basically, and I have very little understanding, but I think it's when they plop your body up atop a mountain or a hill where vultures can then go and just peck away at it.
It's big in Tibet, I think. Yeah.
Okay, maybe one more question. Yep, right here.
Is donating your body to a scientific purpose, is that a disposal or a halfway point?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's almost a bit of everything. It's a bit pick and mix. So donating your organs, for example, that gets an extension of life. Whereas if you donate your body to science, eventually, it will need to be disposed of. I assume, and this is an assumption, just donating your body probably is higher than, say, cremation, just because you'll need that preservation to make sure that it doesn't arrive and attract vermin and rodents and is actually workable for its purpose. So I'd assume there's some preservation and embalming involved in that. But it's a higher purpose, I guess.
All right, we might keep it moving, but Rachael will be mingling around for the rest of the evening and afterwards. So if you want to ask her any questions, feel free to, I want this. Go ahead and, yep.